Brilliant. Hi, everyone. Really warm welcome to you all on this very dark autumn evening. My name's Cole Collins. I am a lecturer in Fine Art Critical Studies at Glasgow School of Art. I'm also a trustee of the Alasdair Archive Board. I'm absolutely delighted to be invited to chair this conversation this evening. The format is on the screen, so you'll see that I'm going to welcome you all. So welcome, welcome, welcome. And then we'll have an introduction from Sorcha Dallas, who is our illustrious leader at the Alasdair Archive. Sarge is the custodian of the Alasdair Archive. And then we'll see a little excerpt from the film, and then we'll hear from Holly, who has curated the exhibition, and Bek and Elouise, who contributed to the exhibition. We'll talk about their relationship to it, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. But please do feel free to come in with some questions as we go through. And yeah, I'm here to answer, help, whatever we can do. So, Sarge, I'm going to hand over to you to give us a little bit of an introduction. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Cole. Yeah, good evening. Welcome, everyone. Great to see you all. I just want to say just a little bit about the archive and why we're here today, I guess, talking about this brilliant project that Holly has curated. So I started working with Alasdair in 2007, was really responsible for the critical reappraisal of his visual work. When he passed away in 2019, I was tasked with legacy planning, and that was really trying to make the case, first of all, for the safe removal of 5,000 items that came directly from Gray's home, which is a core part of our collection. And over the last 5.5 years, really, it's been making the case for why that work matters, why it should stay in Glasgow, be part of a civic collection, and have really open access for everyone to be able to engage with it. What I've been really trying to do with that, though, because my role and my background is from visual art and curatorial studies, is really thinking about a curatorial model for proactively shaping the collection. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, not being a sort of passive record keeper, but someone who proactively shapes it with my own ethics and beliefs, which are very much based in a kind of feminist care ethics of radical empathy and care. And part of what I'm trying to do at the moment in my role as a kind of custodian and curator is think about how do we map and fix overlooked histories. That was central to everything that Alasdair Gray was making within his life and within his work. It was a socially engaged and socially focused practice. Too often in legacy planning, we erase a person and single them out. I really want to bed that back in to a wider network and think about, of course, other creatives that was part of that network and web of influence, but ordinary folk as well. So that's been something that I was really trying to foreground over the last year and a half. So through support from Creative Scotland and an open fund for organisations application, we were able to scale up a bit of our work over the last year and a half. Part of that has been some of our commissioning work, which we've been doing since its inception, largely with writers, but we were able to work with a couple of visual artists this year. Also allowed me to make the case for a part-time curatorial post. So we had a really oversubscribed, really competitive process, lots of people applying for it. As you all know, if you're working within the arts, you'll know that there's few and far between opportunities in general. But it was really for an early stage curator to come and work with me, work with the collection, and really to support them to develop their own project that really sits on top of some of the work that I've been doing here too. So it was wonderful to get Holly in. They've been such an asset to work with, not only in some of the work that they've been doing around cataloguing and archiving the collection, but of course mapping onto that their own experience of being a working class queer curator within the city, and of course mapping into a wider network as part of that too. So it's been hugely valuable for me personally and professionally. I hope for Holly too as well. I would love to be able to keep them, but sadly we're in such precarious situation at the moment in terms of not having core funding, relying on project funding, that I'm making the case to resource the archive more and create more stability around that, and of course to make the case for the curatorial within that going forward too. So I'd like to hope that this is the first of more opportunities that we'll be able to offer, because it has been hugely beneficial for me as a custodian, but also for the wider organisation too. Holly will probably talk a wee bit more about within the project what they've been doing, the network that they've included within that, but also the new commission that they've offered as part of that too, to an emerging writer. So that's all part of the ongoing conversation this evening. Please come and visit if you haven't already. And there is obviously a last tour that Holly's offering tomorrow, a free tour of their exhibition as well. But handing back to you now, Cole. Sorry, that was meant to be brief, but I realised I waffled along for much longer than planned. Thank you.
No worries at all, Sorcha. Thank you so much. I think it's really important as well that people understand where we're sitting just now, not just in the sector, but looking sort of towards where archives are sitting at the moment as well. There is so much precarity in our wider sector. It's really important that we make that known. But I think also the fact that there's work about queer work. This exhibition is about queer working class people in the city who occupy a doubly precarious position of being working class and also queer. I think that all sits and really resonates with the ideas that are behind this exhibition. So before I bring Holly in to introduce the exhibition and talk a little bit about their practice, I just wanted to give a brief bio for each of our speakers so that you've all got them in your head as we go through. So Holly is a curatorial assistant at the Alasdair Great Archive. They graduated from the MFA curatorial practice at DJCAD in 2024 and secured their role at EGA through an open call funded by Creative Scotland, as Sorcha outlined in her introduction. Holly's practice is rooted in a queer feminist methodology of radical care, and they explore archives through a queer working class lens, completely realised through this exhibition. Bek is a trans masculine architect whose work explores the intersections of gender, space, and social equity. He is also a trans rights activist, a founding member of Open Plan Scotland, an LGBTQIA+ advocacy network for people working and studying within the architecture industry, and a founding member of Gender Goals Football Club, Scotland's first trans and non-binary football team. And Elouise Blackburn is a Newcastle-born, Glasgow-based arts practitioner, utilising a variety of mediums and roles from curator to writer to participatory artist. Her practice revolves around community and communal ways of working. Celebrating alternative and non-institutional creativity, Elouise posits that how we create and the act of making itself is as important as the final product. So that's our three speakers for this evening. So I'm going to welcome Holly into the conversation to tell us a little bit about the exhibition. Hi, Holly.
Hi. Um, so the exhibition, well, the theme was given the city, and then throughout my work at the archive and just of my personal belief, to me, a city is not just place, it's made of people. And it's really evident in the archive and Alasdair's work that the city was enriched by the people that were in his networks and his communities. So that's why I went with that. I worked with people from within my communities as a queer working class person to curate a box, like the curated boxes at the archive under Sorcha's curatorial model. Um, I was inspired by a box dedicated to Kelly Crossan. She was not connected to Alasdair through academia or through art. She worked as a cleaner for him, but you could really see the warmth in the correspondences in that box. So I invited everyone into the archive, and I interviewed them after we had sort of co-curated items that were representative of their queer working class experience of Glasgow. So was able to map that experience and fix that alongside the many voices that are preserved at the Alasdair Gray Archive. So the next bit that we're going to do is just a short clip from the film that I made from the interviews. It's about 6-7 minutes. The full version is on YouTube and you can watch it there.
So hopefully this technology works. So let's see. Don't know if you can still see my screen. It's only Can you still see my screen?
Yeah,
YouTube.
yes, it's got a kind of skip verification
Oh God.
sort of paused on it that you need to click, I think.
Yeah, no, I clicked that. And
Mm.
now it's obviously sharing a different. So 1 second, folks. Sorry.
That's okay.
Share a different screen now with you all. One moment. That should now be on YouTube, yeah?
Yeah, great.
Amazing. Sorry, folks. Technological glitches as we go. I'll make it full screen so you don't get all of my trash watching that I do when no one else is looking.
Obviously, the working class and minorities and all of the above literally build cities, but also build culture of cities. And it, I think, is quite a blessing to belong to both of those, to belong to, I'm going to cry again, to be of the lineage of the hands that built the ships and the streets and the furnishings and the everything else to literally be part of the fabric of everything, to come from lorry drivers and ship workers, and for that to be the working people of a city, but also to be the culture makers. Queer people are the ones who are pushing every industry to innovation, pushing every art form to innovation, pushing ways of being in relationships, ways of being friends, ways of being everything. Like, the only way that you can expand is to believe that you can expand. And there's that Oscar Wilde quote of to define is to limit. And there's something about being unlimited.
I really like that.
The piece I have, the object that I have brought with me, is a print that I made with a Gaelic phrase on it. The reason I brought this along was because of the story behind making it, and also because the phrase on it feels quite appropriate to this project. It says, "Y chwisiau grwyg y gases sy'n orteg si arste hocus y llawn." So the wee plant that grows in the midden raises her head the highest. Yeah. Well, the only reason I ended up doing digital art was because I was like, I can't afford paint. Like, I can't afford to stretch a new canvas every week. I can't afford to, like, so I did a painting degree. I just couldn't afford to keep painting all the time. And like, when I was painting, I was like, every time there was like a kind of clear out of the studios, like at the end of term, there would be like a big massive skip outside, like in the sort of yards bit of the art school. And we would literally, like, everyone of all social classes would go and rummage through the skip for like materials, for like boards and canvases that people had stretched and then not used, rich. And like, I would have been painting shit and I didn't want to paint if I'd stretched the canvas. Like, but yeah, like stuff like board, I ended up painting so much on board because like there was always bits of wood. And then like, yeah, going down to like the workshop, the wood workshop, and just be like, do you have offcuts of wood? And I would be painting on that if I was ever painting. But I ended up teaching myself like how to draw digitally on like a £40 Wacom tablet, and like that lasted me like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah,
like,
why is it still going? Like,
they're not made like that anymore. We'll get to that actually. Like, that print is, there's a connection there.
So I chose a SingStar microphone, and that was because, well, I guess it represented a very specific point of my life. I had basically just graduated from uni, and had moved into a flat in Glasgow, and it was the first I lived in Barhead, so it was the first time that I'd ever kind of lived on my own for first, because I always lived with my parents all the way through uni, and I couldn't afford to like move out at that point. So when I had my first actual salary, I moved into Glasgow in Kelvin Bridge in this basement flat and bought a SingStar for the PS2, and it represents queerness for me because it was the first time as well I'd made like queer friends that kind of represented who I felt I wanted to be. I met lots of trans people through like living in Kelvin Bridge, meeting a lot of like people that studied at GSA, went out clubbing with them, and we used to always bring everyone back to our little damp basement flat in Kelvin Bridge and put on SingStar like every weekend. And it was kind of, yeah, it represented like that really prominent time. Do you know, interestingly, when I was in my early 20s, so I'm obviously 30 now, so I've been, yes, I've been round the block many times. I don't know if that makes sense. Am I allowed to say that? Yeah, I've been to many places in Glasgow, and when I was like in my early 20s, I definitely would say my safe space was like in the club, and I used to go, well, in hindsight, club too much probably, but I used to go out all the time, and like I would always go to Poetry Club at the time, and like go to a lot of the queer nights there. And it was like every weekend I'd be like, oh, I'm going to take a weekend off, and then I would be in the club again, and then I would be at an afters again. So that was definitely a very like specific point of my early 20s, like or I say early to mid. Like I partied a lot, as you know, Holly. So yeah, that was definitely the beginning of having a safe space. But I think like as I've gotten a bit older now, like I'm probably I would say actually like setting up gender goals and kind of revisiting my love for football and hanging around lots of people through that and doing a lot more kind of advocacy work for like Palestine and like advocacy work for like the architecture industry. I think that's kind of now where my safe spaces are. And the reason for that was because I knew it wasn't sustainable to be clubbing all the time, pretty much. And don't get me wrong, I still love to go to the club and like love all that, but like I definitely think I'm trying to find it in other community spaces now.
Super. So hang on. I am going to switch screens again. Give me a second. Again, you see my rubbish choice in YouTube watching when it finishes there. Tour de France and well, PG Harvey's not a rubbish choice, I suppose, but Tour de France definitely is for anyone not interested in cycling. So yeah. Some people go clubbing. I like to watch the Tour de France. What can I say? So no, thanks so much. That little excerpt only really gives you a little snippet into how wonderful this whole project is. And I think if we've got sort of time for, I want to be a little bit self-indulgent and have a sort of reflection on some of the things that happened in that video and sort of some of the conversations that come through. And I think I'm also a queer working class person who's, I lived the whole way through all three of my degrees at my parents' house. My first time living on my own was living in a flat in Hanover in Germany, and surrounded by a collection of books from the 1800s in a psychologist's home that she was renting out because she lived in the south of Turkey most of the year to deal with her rheumatoid arthritis. So, I was seeing like transported from Paisley, so not too far from Ubeck, to Hanover into this really wealthy lady's house on one of the nicest streets I've ever seen in my life. And it was just that real kind of like culture shock of having grown up where I had grown up and the way I'd grown up. But I think some of the reflections, I think and I said this to Holly when we had a chat about the exhibition earlier on, I said, I think the loveliest thing about the footage is the joy and the laughter and the silliness that comes across in that kinship that's been formed. And that kinship is so important for us as queer people, but also I think as you go out into the world and you enter certain professions that are um maybe not the friendliest to working class people, or maybe where your voice isn't often heard, or voices like yours aren't often heard. I mean, you change your register, you code switch all the time when you're a working class person in these spaces because you're worried about how your voice is going to be perceived. And then when you find another working class person, it's like, oh my God, the sparks, the joy, we're together, we're safe. And I think that's really important because back in the video, there's a section where you bring up this whole idea of like safe spaces and finding those safe spaces. And I'll come to talk about this in each of your sections, but I think there's something really important about safe spaces. And I think it has to be emphasis on the multiplicity of those spaces and that we don't have to feel safe in just one singular space, but actually we can find multiple spaces in which we feel safe, welcomed, loved, part of, and find community there. And I think that's often lost on people. I think people find they have to find one rooted point and stick with that, but actually we realize that as humans we're multiplicitous, right? We've got lots of different facets and phases and ideas, and we go through, even if you think about your fashion choices from 19 to 30, how different they look, regardless of where you were brought up. I mean, some people don't change. Some people are still living like me. I've been living in black since I was like 16 years old, so that doesn't change. But that's just life. But there have been some terrible haircuts along the way. including one inspired by Kajagoogoo, which most of you are far too young to ever have heard of, but you know, in the call, but Kajagoogoo, and look up Lamal and Kajagoogoo and have a good time with it. That's all I can say. So you know, but that's kind of that came through in the footage, and it comes through in the objects as well, and that some of the objects feel like an in-joke, but I kind of like that they feel like an in-joke as well. I feel like you need the context of the story to understand why they're important, because of what it does is it surfaces not only what museums what archives like the Alasdair Archive is trying to do, which is to de-hierarchize some of these notions of what is art, what is document, what is letter, what is actually worth preserving. That's been gone because that was Alasdair's way of working, right? Alasdair used all sorts of materials. You know, you've all seen the sketchbooks, I'm sure, that are actually ledgers that he found like that in a skip that he then brought home and used the paper because, you know, he didn't have a huge amount of riches, and GSA certainly didn't pay him well enough when he was a tutor there. But that's part of this kind of reuse finding that you need to know these stories to understand what's going on behind it. Um, and there's a long history of that, right? But there's other museums that are finding ways of doing that. So, sort of on the queer side of things, you can look at what the Schwules Museum do in Berlin, the Gay Museum, which collects things like people's video collections. It collects and archives them because it tells a story about queer culture at that moment, right? About what are queer people watching at the time. They've actually got like Betamax collections in the Schwules Museum of things like old dubbed Golden Girls episodes, for example, on one end of it, and then the other end is like what the gay porn was happening at Betamax at the time that you had to get under the counter. So there's this like whole kind of spectrum of what culture is, and I think that comes through in the exhibition, in that it's mapped onto the city, but it's also mapped onto objects about how we define ourselves, how we create our stories, how we build our lives as queer working class people in spaces that often aren't really made for us, but we have to somehow make them fit and make ourselves fit into them. And I think that's what's really beautiful about the exhibition, Holly. I think that's what's really beautiful about the objects. I think it's what's really beautiful about the stories that lie behind the exhibition and the objects. And so that's my little bit of self-indulgent reflection on what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've been thinking about as we've been coming up to this event. Um, so yeah, I want to now start the actual bit where I get to ask questions, if that's all right with everyone. So we're going to start with Holly as the curator. I'm going to bring you in. I'm going to go with this lovely image here. And I just want to ask you, like, what did it feel like to do this work?
Um, Scary. It was so weird to like visualize myself as the curator having just come out of my master's where everything was done in a group, or if it wasn't, I was in the studio with people to like have that big group discussion, and then having um to do this in a workplace setting, and like my support is Sorcha, but Sorcha's also my boss. Like, do you know what I mean? So a lot of these ideas also come from Sorcha and being able to talk to her, but it was so strange even when it was up because I hadn't finished the film, like it didn't feel like it was finished. And it wasn't until like everything was done that it felt like it was complete. Um, yeah, it was so weird.
I guess it's really interesting that I think, was it weirder still because a lot of the objects were kind of like personal almost to you?
Yeah, it was really nice as well to know that there was um I don't know, like having that relationship beforehand with the people that were involved. I felt like it really brought out sort of like things that were genuine in the interviews, or just even in how I ended up separating it out into five themes.
Mhm.
That was like the natural storyline that came through from how personal the objects were.
Yeah, and I think you get a sense of that. I think, you know, although I mean, you can see from this image that it looks like a very curated exhibition, you know, that it's got all the kind of usual markers of what an exhibition would look like. You know, things are hanging from the ceiling in the way that pictures would have, you know, from a picture rail, or things are framed, there's wall text, there's even like this new trendy kind of every museum's doing it, and I love it, this like graphic on the wall slightly pixelated or blown up. Like every museum's doing this now, but it's not a bad thing. That's not a criticism of it, right? But it's a thing. You've got all these styles of what a kind of like any type of exhibition would look like in terms of there's um there's a methodology there that's really kind of standard, but actually when you look beyond that, you see that there's something else going on under the surface. And you talked about in your introduction a little bit this curated box.
Mhm.
So could you maybe tell us a little bit about the curated box for those that don't know about it?
So, if you haven't been to the archive, it's all a lot of it is in boxes that are themed around people, works, or like other themes. And it was a box that was dedicated to Kelly Crossan, who worked as a cleaner for Alasdair, as I mentioned before. Um, that really inspired me. It was like this box full of warmth. There's like little torn notes about like how he's lost his keys or he's forgot to pay her. But there's also he's written a poem for her. Like you can see how deeply appreciated every person is by Alasdair. And that's sort of why I wanted to like make that box of items that also map that like a life or an experience, which is that queer working class experience. And it was really interesting to do. Like me and Beck would be like on FaceTime, like working together to figure out what kind of items would work. I sent a lot of voice notes to people um, to see like what, because everybody was getting a bit confused, like what is my item? What one thing is going to be representative? But like whatever you choose, it's sort of is going to represent it anyway because that is your life and that's your experience. Because I was the same. I was like, I either have too much stuff or I've got nothing to put in it.
Yes, I mean it's quite interesting because your original reflection was doing this on your own, but actually it sounds like there was a lot of that group
Mhm.
community context going on behind the
Yeah.
scenes.
Yeah, I think that definitely helped. Like having that story and the co-curation between like us that built the box together. And I think I found that easier than because like when you came to speak to me, we curated the box and that was sort of done, and then I forgot I had to like curate an exhibition after that.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. It
Yeah.
was like, oh, I've got this thing and it's lovely, but then I was like, okay, so what about the exhibition? It was like, a bad thing, which was totally. I mean, but that's the thing, I think, isn't it? Because like that, there's so much fun in that material. There's so much fun in the memories. There's so much fun in the making of it that you forget that it's a job sometimes, and I think
Mhm.
it's quite a lovely thing to be able to do. Um, I'm wondering how much like, in what can you talk a little bit about how the project itself, that the project in totality is sort of a response to the archive that you've been embedded in for the last what year and a bit?
Yeah, yeah, almost a year, yeah. It was actually really nice. We had an event. We were showing Lauren, who works the archive on her PhD, we were showing her film that she made in Berlin. And Roger Glass was there, who's a writer.
Mhm.
And he came to me after and he said that he could really see Alistair in it. He was like, it's very different from what Alistair makes, but you can see the Alistair in it. And that's like one of the nicest things that anyone could have said because it obviously is so different to Alistair's work. There's not like this isn't the kind of work Alistair makes, but it's that for me, the archive, it's not just about world building in terms of his work. You can see world building in his whole life. Like it's completely, he's making this world for himself. And that's sort of the response to it is that the lives of many and that world you've built for yourself that I could see when I'm there at the archive and accessioning all these items and I'm seeing all these relationships.
Can you talk a little bit more about this world building? So maybe not in Alice's work, but particularly in your exhibition. What's the world you're building in this exhibition for us?
Oh, I don't know. Um, I mean, like when my tutor came, she was like, "You can see that this is you." But for me, like when I first moved to Glasgow, because I from Stirling, I lived in Dundee for 4 years for my undergrad, and then I moved here. None of my friends that I knew were in Glasgow. I moved with my friend who'd lived here for several years. She had such a built network, and it took me over a year to like make friends. And then for some reason, all my friends from Dundee moved to Glasgow. But what has happened to me that the more that I meet people and my career circles expand, it's like my world is expanding. And these
Mhm.
people that I'm meeting and I'm bringing in to my world are expanding my experience of the city. So a lot of the things like the photograph on the wall, that's a recent friend that I met. He's a recent graduate from GSA, Jock Thomson. He just graduated with photography. And then the photo of Dylan Reese, who run Ponyboy, that wasn't originally in the box, that was afterwards. A person called Spit, who's a photographer, I ended up having that in. It's these expansive things that, like, through meeting people and having these connections with other queer and working class person, that's like the world that is building, I think.
That's really lovely, I think. And I think the fact that the city's part of it, but it's not all of it, right? It's
Mhm.
these connections that come into the city, but they haven't necessarily originated in the city, all of
Mhm.
them. And I think that's really lovely. I think because quite often in histories, particularly queer histories, the city is the focal point of that history, of that geography, of how it's built. In the working class, until probably after the Second World War, is very much centered on urban life or city centre life, but then obviously it gets pushed out as regeneration happens, and there's that move with the new towns in Scotland that pushes working class families further away from the places actually where they work. And they create these like little suburban that are semi-urban, actually not
Mm.
really suburban kind of hubs, right? And East Kilbride's one of them, for example,
Mm.
or Cumbernauld, or these areas that are miles out from the city centre, actually, if you look at them on a map, but they're
Mhm.
still deemed close enough to the city that people can live in them and move back to them. And these connections are really important, I think, in building this world that you're talking about. Like I think there's something really lovely about there's something environmental about the exhibition. I think, not just with the club image on
Mm.
the wall, which is an environment. We know that certain members of the exhibition contributors loved a club, as we heard in the video. We heard that very clearly. Who didn't in their 20s and late 20s and early 30s? Doesn't matter. I think also, I think what I was really intrigued by with the video as well is the importance of voice in that space. And I wonder if you could maybe talk us through, I think we think often of exhibitions as this kind of visual experiential piece, but what was it like to build that voice into it with the film? Was that really an important piece for you, or was it sort of something that was supplementary?
Um, at first I did not want to make a film because I find it hard. I make films all the time and I'm almost friends with Premiere Pro. I feel like I'm almost there, but not quite. So the editing of films is kind of what put me off. But I knew that having the voice was important. I say it all the time that, like, having working class voice in art spaces is so important, and having queer histories told in their own voices is so important, which is why I did the interviews in the first place. And I think it really contextualizes the objects and the text that I've written when you get to listen to why the individual chose their object. Um, I had someone come visit it, the first person to sit in the beanbag, and they sat and they watched the film in the space, and then there's also a curated playlist, and they listened to that as well. And like, you could tell that it really sort of deepened the understanding and the knowledge of why these objects were here and the people that are connected to the objects, because the objects didn't just come from nothing, they came from people who chose them.
Yeah, I think that's really important about the objects, isn't it? They're not these kind of sterilized academic pieces of chosen sort of in that curatorial way that often someone goes into collection or an archive and they go, that's the piece I want to have in my
Mhm.
exhibition, and they take it out and they place it somewhere else, and that context is often lost or buried a little bit that you have to find it. I think that's there really visible. Um there's a curated playlist, which I didn't
Mhm.
know.
Yes.
I missed that. Tell me about the curated playlist.
Um, I can't remember even where it came from, but um, because it's obviously split into, like, it's split into five themes. There's work, friendship, clothes, homemaking, and then obviously nightlife. And I don't know where it came from, but we wanted to have maybe like a mix or something.
Hmm.
But then I ended up just putting something on my close friend's story. I was like, guys, do you have songs that remind you of Glasgow that are not like just, I don't know, like Scottish songs like Caledonia, like Paolo Nutini's cover from the garage. But I ended up opening it up to like people who'd been part of it and just opened up to like wider groups. And it was really interesting to see songs that reminded them of place, because they're not actually anything to do with Glasgow. Most of them. Some of them are. And it's the weirdest playlist ever, but it's like somebody listened to it in the exhibition. I thought it was so funny. But it goes so far between genres, and it's really nice to see sort of what people associate with this city, even when it's like not my experience, not necessarily the experience that's like explicitly shown in these items, but a wider experience of Glasgow to the playlist.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. It's like that thing of the object stories, like why, the choice of some things is really obvious as to why it's, the Glasgow connection is there, but other things are not, and they have to really be surfaced, and that comes to that musical scene as well. And I think that's really brilliant. I'm going to ask you one final question, Holly, and then I'm going to invite some of your lovely contributors to have a bit of a chat with me as well. Feels like a bit of a fireside chat, like CEOs do. I'm going to invite our next person in to sit beside me and have this conversation. So, no, so my last question is, what has been the biggest takeaway for you from this project? And I think, yeah, I'm gonna leave that. I'm not gonna expand on that. I'm gonna leave it. What's the biggest
Okay.
takeaway for you from this project?
I don't know, to not be scared. Um, I'm sure Sorcha felt like she was pulling teeth half the time with me not being able to make a decision, so that's a big one. But my high school art teacher signed my leavers shirt with "Just shut up and do it," so that's something that I'm still working on. But I think the biggest takeaway is that this is important. I feel like this project could obviously grow arms and legs, um, and I guess really for me, this isn't even just like curatorially, this is something I'm feeling in my personal life as well, but that community and being with others is the most important thing. When I feel the worst, it's because I've spent all this time alone. And like when I feel the best, it's when I feel connected to people and we're talking about these big things or just doing like projects like this, which obviously is a big thing, but like I sat with people that I knew and we talked about these shared experiences. And yeah, I think just the focus on like community and making sure that we're there for each other.
That's amazing and a really beautiful note to end on. But I think it comes through in the exhibition. So well done, like
Thank you.
really well done. A virtual round of applause to you
Thank you.
from here. That's amazing. Obviously, you can chime in with some conversation if you like. Being the curator, it's your show. Quite literally and figuratively, it's your show. I think we're going to invite Beck into the conversation. So we'll give Beck a moment to unmute.
Hello.
Hey Beck, how you doing?
Yeah, good. Yeah, very good.
Good. Nice to meet you. Um, so I'm gonna throw you right in the deep end and ask, what was it like to work with Holly?
Oh, do you know, I was actually just thinking about that when I haven't seen that video clip, and when it was announced that it was you were going to show it, I was like, oh my God, I say all the time. This is going to be such a nightmare to watch back. But I actually think because me and Holly have such a good relationship already, and it was quite a personal project, at least what I'd submitted to the archive was really personal. It felt so natural speaking on camera
Mm.
for like the first time in my whole life, which was a nice thing to have, and also just so nice to actually look back at it and be like, okay, I'm actually quite proud of that.
Yeah, you should be. I mean, you're really articulate, and I think that came across. I wouldn't worry about the M's and O's, and that. I mean, that's part of speaking in public in any situation. I do it for a living and still do it, so don't worry about that. Um, I thought it was really lovely in your video where you talked about, this kind of quite left field object. I think it's fair to say. Um, but I think it's really lovely that that both mics were included. Was that a deliberate choice?
Yeah, I think the the two mics and the game, that specific game was the one that we played all the time, and it was always a battle. So the two mics had to be included.
I thought I was going to get a lovely story about bringing people together and two mics and two voices, harmonies, queer community. Nah, it's a battle. I love it.
It's a sing-off battle. That's what it is.
It's full on cutthroat. There's none of this nice. Love it. No, that's brilliant. I think I think it's really also I think your kind of openness in the video is really important and the film is really important to talk about. Is it something you have found through doing the work? Do you find it slightly easier to talk about that, that change in your life, that being a queer working class person living on their own? So I'm going to go to your Bek, sorry, move it on so you can see up close. Do you feel more comfortable talking about that change, that transition now that you've done this and it's out in the world?
Yeah, I think yeah, definitely. I think when I was playing SingStar in the basement, I was not someone who was as well articulate about my experience, and I didn't really know myself as well as I do now. And I was still kind of working in architecture, but like was ready to quit the industry because I just couldn't find, well, I suppose it comes into having imposter syndrome as well and feeling like I was in a space that like I was like I don't actually really understand why I'm in this space and I don't feel like I belong here. So it's taken like a long time to actually get to a point now where I can reflect on it and be like, okay, this was like a really pivotal moment, and now I've came so far and like actively put a lot more energy into trying to take up space in these sort of places where yeah you don't meet a lot of other working class people, to be honest. So yeah, and also just yeah, working with Holly, being able to then kind of pick something so silly and then reflect on that and tie it into something that actually is quite meaningful. Well, for me anyway. So
I think it's so meaningful, the whole exhibition, and I think the fact that you have a personal connection to it probably makes it all the more meaningful in that sense. Um, I wondered if could maybe talk about your experience of being a queer working class person living in Glasgow, like coming from Barrhead, which is, not a million miles away from Glasgow, but it's not the most cosmopolitan of places, let's be honest. I mean, I'm from Johnston, which is even less cosmopolitan, so let's not go there. But but like, could you talk about that experience of being a queer working class person living in Glasgow?
yeah, I mean, when I was kind of desperate to get out of Barhead when I was younger, to be fair, especially when I was studying, because it's one of those things where I was close enough that I could get the train in, so there wasn't really a need for me to move out, and
Mhm.
also I couldn't really afford at the time. I think if I'd maybe got a place like a uni place somewhere else, I would have maybe been forced almost to move, but yeah, because it was in Barhead and traveling in, and yeah, when I did eventually move to Glasgow, into the city centre, it was kind of a bit. It was kind of crazy how many queer people I met because there's not a lot in Barhead. I did have a couple of queer friends in Barhead, but like no trans friends, no one that I could really actually relate to and feel seen around. Um, and I feel like that is quite tied into the queer experience because most queer people I know have at some point left their small town to move into the city. Um, Pretty much everyone in my family still lives in Barhead, and I don't think
Mhm.
they'll ever leave. But I've just like, as soon as I could, I moved. Um, yeah,
So I guess living in Glasgow has been a way for you to find community, would you say?
yeah, absolutely. I think it's a community that now means so much to me, but I would have never even knew existed when I was in Barhead, which is yeah, it's kind of crazy.
I think that's such a lovely thing because I think, the when Holly and I chatted originally about the exhibition, I asked him, where's the city in the exhibition? I asked that question looking at the objects because for me, as the outsider looking in, it wasn't clear where the city was. But when you see it all together and you see that space being created, you really get the sense that the city is actually really key for all these connections coming together. And that then layered with all these connections and conversations that are happening between you all as a kind of queer group, but also individually as friends, is I think is really important in the city. I think is really key for finding that world, and building that world. So I'm looking off to my notes at the side of my screen here because I've only got one screen at the moment. So apologies for my eyes diverting away. Um, you kind of also talked about, we when I introduced you, we talked about some of the kind of social things that you do or the community things you do, so gender goals, Open Plan Scotland. Um, do is that where you've always found community, sort of in these organised spaces, or has there been spaces in the city that have been other ways of you finding community?
Yeah, I think to be honest, that's always kind of been something that's quite central to everything that I've done, and even from a younger age. And I think the older I've got, the more important it's probably came for me. So, things like setting up Open Plan Scotland, um, it was realizing that there was a like I felt out of place in the architecture industry, as probably I think I'm actually one of very few trans architects in Scotland right now.
Yeah.
And realizing that I was going to quit the industry and being like, okay, well, I have the power to change this. I can create that community, and I can, move forward and advocate for people. And now, like, Open Plan Scotland, we now have like a trans student as well who's part of the network and things like that. So things have started to now build, and then everyone has kind of we've created like our own wee sort of architecture community together. And then similarly with gender goals, it's been the same. And I think I've just always had that attitude with things where it's like, I don't feel good about this, I'm going to change it. So yeah.
That's why you love a battle, clearly, with SingStar, isn't it? That's clearly what it is. That's always been there. No, that's brilliant. And I'm really pleased to hear that um that change is happening. I taught architectural history in the past, and I used to teach trans architectonics. So actually think about how we change space to make it more queer friendly, but particularly on trans area. And like the architects I taught, who were largely middle class white Germans, it was in Germany I taught. They were that architectural history. Their minds were blown by the fact that you didn't have to have a main bedroom and two smaller bedrooms. Like you could actually have the same shape and same size for all three bedrooms in a four-bedroom house, or like that kind of thing. Anyway, that's an aside. So, I want to just kind of end with one kind of quick last question. If you're not an archivist, you're not a curator, but I want to think about, for you, what is the importance of archiving queer and working class lives, if you could
I
reflect on
feel
that.
like it's for me, it's about kind of legacy and understanding our history in years to come, because something that I like, that you always hear this as well with like people who don't know anything about the trans community. They're like, why is there so many trans people around now? And it's like, well, we did always exist, it's just that our history wasn't written about or acknowledged. And if we had acknowledged that and written about it, probably then we'd be in a much better place where we would feel more comfortable with our identity. We would see people, we would see role models, and start to kind of understand that. But it's actually quite challenging to kind of understand your history, like your queer history. And yeah, so it is nice now to know that there's obviously people like Holly who's actually advocating for that and trying to kind of change that into something that we can kind of hopefully in years to come look back and be like, this is when bit random Beck from Barhead used to hang out in the basement of their flat in Kelvin Bridge.
Brilliant. No, and I think that's really key, right? It's personal legacy as well as collective legacy. I think that is essential to this understanding. I think that is also part of the brilliance of Alasdair's archive. In general, is that, as both Sorcha and Holly have outlined in other places, that Alasdair's archive collected, people, and he made people part of his life, and he had so much love for individual people, and you can see that he treats people without any discrimination in terms of they're all the same to him. They're all just as important, whether they are the person who cleans his house and that, or sweeps the streets. The story about the street cleaner that then became part of the mural in Hill Head. And I think through to those people who he had really close relationships, like Liz Lochhead, who was a national figure, or Edwin Morgan, another national figure. I think there's no difference for him in the importance of those people in his life. And I think that also comes through in this exhibition, is that these stories are just as important as telling that big capital Q, capital H, capital WC queer working class history. So thank you so much for talking to us tonight, Vic. I'm going
Thanks
to
very much.
invite our next one. Thanks so much. Hi, Elouise. I'm going to invite you in to join us.
Hi.
Hey, lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How does it feel seeing something that's yours up on the wall of an archive?
Yeah, it's quite surreal. I feel like even when I was writing it, in my head it was just something that like existed on my laptop or like in my notebooks. So like seeing it when I went to get them off of Holly, I remember just looking at it like it's so strange to see my like little name written down there.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you wrote?
Yeah, I think when I initially sent my proposal off to like apply for the writing, I'd written like I wanted it to be like a conversation, like between the objects, but also between like the archive itself and like the viewer, and I want it to feel a little bit like dialogue, but I didn't really know what that would look like. It took me a while to figure out the footnotes, and the way I work's a little bit spread out. So I had like some of it was on my laptop, some of it I put into InDesign so I could like figure out the pages, and I had like a notebook I would bring around with me like on the train to and from work, and I would like write little sentences. So it was just like everything was so spread out. It was like a collage trying to put it back together. But I think the end result's kind of what I'd started with and what I'd hoped it would look like by the end. I think some of the pieces, like some of the objects, like spoke to me a lot more immediately than other ones. Like the Sing Star was the one that I immediately was like, I know exactly what that's about. So some of my uni friends had like a karaoke, but we only had a Glee version. So everything was just Gleek. There was no way around it.
Amazing.
But I think it feels like quite a personal piece as well. I feel like I can hear my voice still when I reread it, which is quite a nice thing to have like kind of input myself into this exhibition and into the archive in some way.
That's so lovely that your voice is still coming through in this piece, and when it's a piece about something bigger than you, right? You know, it's
Yeah.
an archive, it's a piece about the curation. Um, I wonder, you know, we've heard stories about, I think everyone talked about coming to Glasgow and moving to Glasgow, and you obviously have moved probably the furthest. Can you talk
Yeah,
a little about what
sadly
it's like
English.
for you being in Glasgow?
Yeah, I think part of the reason I moved up, like I love Newcastle and it's something I always love going back to, but when you're from there, it feels like very claustrophobic. You're
Mm.
always like one mutual away from everyone that you meet, and like they know your mom or your mom's cousin or you like it's always like that. But someone had gone to Glasgow a year before I did because I took a year out and said that Glasgow was just Newcastle but bigger. I think a lot of it's to do with like the industry and like a lot there's like obviously a lot of working class areas, which is a lot of what Newcastle is as well. So I feel like that was what kind of pushed me to come up. But I think I didn't end up finding anyone that was working class for like 5 years because I went to Glasgow uni. So I was just surrounded by Londoners for so long. And some of them are still like good friends, and it's not to like discount what they mean to me, but I feel like they'd all be sitting there like, oh, do you know when you're like driving through the French countryside to your mom and dad's like French home, and I'd be like, I don't know what it's like to drive through Newcastle to my mom and dad's home. We do not own property. But I think it was such a nice thing when I finally found that group that it kind of like part of the reason why I do community work is because I think such an important part of any kind of art project or any kind of history is the connection. I think a lot of that's what like Holly's project sort of brings. It's like a lot of it is what all these people mean to each other, as well as what these objects mean, and like how does everyone link up. And I think it took me a while, but when I started working in Glasgow a bit more and branching out is when I kind of found like, okay, this is what I actually did move to the city for. I didn't move here for, could have gone to London if I wanted to meet Londoners, but it was a lot nice. When I met Scottish people, that was good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I had a student once say they were from Gateshead, funnily enough, and they had moved to, this was Edinburgh, not Glasgow, but they'd moved to Scotland thinking they'd be further away from London, and then they were
Yeah.
mistaken. And I think that's really interesting about them, like how I think our universities actually really struggle with some of this classwork, right? And I do a lot of this stuff,
Yeah.
widening participation, widening access, all that stuff. But I think it's really interesting sometimes to hear that from the other side, and what you can do then is how you flip that and take it back out to the community and work with communities to kind of open that conversation up. And I think that's in all of your work that we're talking about, you know, Sorcha's work, your work, Holly's work, Bek's work, you know, taking the stuff that's important to you and giving back to your community with all of your accrued knowledge that you've got and your little possession of code switching that you're able to do by stepping outside of that kind of boundary
Yeah.
that is classed in a way. Um, I think I'd also kind of it really resonates with me, the fact that so kind of how did you find community in that way then? How did you were saying it was difficult to find it at uni for those
Yeah.
years. How did you then find it when you went out into the city? Was the city part of that or?
It was a big part of it. I think it's when I left the West End, really, is just going anywhere but there. You kind of find it a lot more. I think for the most part, for like the last 2 years of uni, it was just I used to work in a cafe in the West End, but the two people that I worked with were like working class women from working class backgrounds, at least 15 to 16 years older than me. But we really did bond, and for a while they were the only people I knew that were also from the same background as me. But in the last 2 years, like I work in Easterhouse quite a lot and like Shelston, and I work with Rumpus Room on South Side. And I think through all of those, I've really found a lot more like people who are working in the same field as me, around the same age as me, which is quite nice. But also like seeing kids as well who are like 9, 10, or even younger from the background that I came from. It's quite nice to just see that they are here, they do exist in the city and exist in similar ways I existed in Newcastle. And I feel like it's been really specific to like certain areas and houses that look like mine and estates that look like mine, because we're all kind of from the same industrial like backgrounds.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean the East End's well, the far East End, I guess it really is with Shettleston Easterhouse is definitely I'm just down the road from there actually. But it's a kind of special area in that sense, and that its demographic hasn't really changed and it hasn't really
Yeah.
been affected by gentrification the way that, North Kelvindale has, whatever that means. So it's Mary Hill, guys. It's Rock Hill. What are you talking about? Anyway,
Yeah.
so but that shift in that area, and I think that's really wonderful. I think it is. I think yeah, I was really struck by how you articulate this finding community, and I think that's a really lovely thing that's also come through this whole exhibition and through your text actually as well as that community is center to that. I wonder if well I can also ask you, I mean, how much did you and Holly have conversations about what the exhibition was beforehand? How much of that was part of the process of engaging with their vision for the the exhibition as well as trying to still maintain your voice and your ideas and your reflections on it.
Yeah, well, we went through like the city box together, and like Holly explained what each of the like pieces meant and like everything like that. And then we went through a lot of other boxes just in the archive itself. So I can't remember, it's the cleaner, it's the one Holly mentioned earlier. I can't mind her name, but I think that was the box that like immediately spoke to me as well. And just looking at like all his little notes, and then there's like a girl, I think it was like Alasdair Gray's like colleague's daughter, and she just appears so much in like little things. And I think it's just the way that like people kind of stick with you even if they're not that close to you. But I think that was kind of what carried to me, was just first of all like community at the forefront, but also just the way that like I think we were talking a lot about the way that working class people archive, which tends to just you just hoard everything, and to other people it might just look like nonsense, but I think when you're from it, like so much of the box I could see in my own room anyways, like the small notes and like the Sing Star and like scarves and like vintage like clothes that you've like scored. Like I think there's so much about the box that kind of spoke to me anyways, that the conversation I was having with Holly I was kind of seeing play out as I was writing as well. I think after the initial meeting we would just spoke over email, and then I listened to the interviews as well, which helped to like understand what those objects meant to the people who donated them, because as much as I could write my own interpretation, I think it was good to know that this might not be true for everybody. But I think, yeah, I think a lot of it was just coming from the same background. A lot of it kind of jumps out at you anyways, that it doesn't always need that much explanation, which is quite good. But
Yeah, for sure. What was it like to take on those other voices into your writing?
yeah, I think that was the bit where I was like, I don't want to speak for somebody. I think I tried to like speak for someone else, but kind of through what I related on, so that it
Mm.
wasn't necessarily just speaking for them, but speaking with them, if in like that kind of sense.
Yeah.
I think some of the pieces that I struggled a little bit with the jacket, but when I figured out what that was saying, it was a bit easier to write for somebody else. I I think a lot of it like forced me to have to connect with each individual object and then turn each individual person to be able to actually write something that felt like it was a conversation, not just a me going off of first impressions.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so lovely. I think your writing brings together the whole conversation piece, right? Which is that Holly is in direct conversation with the archive as an employee, but then also direct conversation with the box, which is in direct conversation with Alasdair and the archive, which is then in direct conversation with all of these people in their life that they've chosen to bring into this space. And then your piece of writing sort of brings that all together through not just through these conversations that we actually hear and see these through these interviews, but then can read in a different voice and a different interpretation. And that conversation piece, I think, is really beautiful. That's at the heart of it. And then here we are sitting having another conversation about these conversations. That I think what it really does signal is that actually talking to each other, finding that voice, finding each other, finding commonality is way more important than anything else that we can possibly do as not just queer working class people, but people generally.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if that's something you maybe are reflecting on in your writing more generally, conversation, or was it just for this piece that you had thought about conversation?
I feel like because I so much of my work is like participatory art, it's so like reliant on conversation, but I sometimes struggle to figure out how to put that in writing. I always feel like I love talking about like objects and environments like speaking to you and what they might say, but I think sometimes it feels a lot more like it's one solitary voice than it is like multiple people speaking and multiple people connecting. I think this is like the first time where I've like properly put pen to paper and like made that happen in a way that feels good. Not like something I wouldn't want to see the light of day.
Oh,
But I think it's something I'm trying to like move forward with as well in quite a lot of ways.
yeah, that's brilliant. I think it's great. Um, I want to jump just back to Bek for a second, if I can ask, what have you read Elouise's text?
No, I haven't actually read it. So
There we go.
yeah, I need to read it.
Yeah. Because if you had, I was gonna ask what it was like to see your object represented through Elouise's kind of
Yeah.
voice and
I,
what it's like.
I'm very interested now to read this.
And Holly, what was it like to see your vision sort of re-articulated through Elouise's writing?
It was really nice. I remember reading like a first draft, and I got like really emotional seeing like somebody else connect to these items, because I think that was so hard as well. Like I knew what my connection to these items were, and I could see like the vision for what community I was trying to show and what experience I was trying to show. But then someone else, and especially like because Eloise also isn't from Glasgow, and like to have that, I could see instantly, like when we met for the first time and we're going through the objects together, I could instantly see like her genuine connection to the items and her lived experience as well in these items. So then seeing it like laid out on the paper and everything was just so nice. I think Eloise, if you don't mind, you could do a reading of some of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We chose a bit.
That's all right. I can jump in now. Sorry, I'm just gonna have a drink of water. I'm slightly croaky from work.
No worries. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing so we can pin Elouise as the reader. Give me just 1 second, folks. Hang on. Oh, maybe I can't do that because I'm not a host. No, I can't do that because I'm not a host. Sorry, folks. That's fine.
Right, good to start.
Yep.
I've never been good at throwing things out. Waste not, want not after all, but I find it impossible to know what is waste and what I'll never want, so I keep everything I think might have worth, which is everything I touch. How do you decide something has no value when it's the only reminder of who you are? How are you supposed to throw something out when it feels like the only record of the life you've lived? Is it worth keeping when its only meaning is you? These are whispers of your day-to-day life, formed through small tattered notes, worn-out hand-me-down clothes, on ticket stubs and torn wristbands, hidden in handmade birthday cards and old phones. What value could they hold outside of your old diaries, excavated from the back of your wardrobe or the box under your bed? Would they still call out if you weren't there to listen? Would anyone else even hear? Tucked away in an old whiskey warehouse, there's a life's worth of murmurs calling out across the canal. Tattered notes, pages of long-winded letters, postcards void of even an ounce of wordless space, dog-eared books, margins littered with scrawled thoughts, invoices and bills and shopping lists, sketches and portraits and cards. The voices of those in the Alasdair Great Archive travel down roads that carry them and streets that echo back. Fixed in that old whiskey warehouse, those voices reverberate across the city that holds them to all those that can hear their words. I know the words, though they're not mine. I know the voice, though I've never heard it. They're not scraps from my life, but they call out to the tattered notes and manky old notebooks collecting dust in my bedroom. They natter on with the hand-drawn birthday cards and old friends' forgotten drawers. They ramble to letters and postcards sent and unsent. They gossip with the childhood diaries in my mom's loft, debate ideas with well-read books stacked in the room I shared with my sister. These aren't my scraps, and they aren't yours either, but don't they feel like so much more than someone else's odds and ends, more than just someone else's life? Flipping through those books, meandering through those notes and letters, perusing those prints and paintings, sitting in that old green chair, doesn't it feel like they're asking about you? Those murmurs across the canal call out to a new box in their midst, filled with scraps of life just waiting to talk. They're just bits and pieces of lives you haven't lived, of lives you don't know. A print, a card, a receipt, a torn wristband, 2 fragrance strips, 2 notes, a coat, a neck scarf, a film camera, a copy of SingStar, 2 mics. But I swear they sound familiar. I recognize that voice. I don't own the print. I didn't make that blue flower or write that Gaelic phrase, but I know it. Its story of the weed growing tall on the midden gives words to a feeling I could never name before. I feel the blue flower sprouting through the estates I grew up on, hear its tale through every home I lived in. It speaks to the art we make for us, to the art we make to survive, and to the moments when they are one and the same. The weed growing highest on the midden sprouts along the murmurs of that old whiskey warehouse, in prints and posters and books that gave life purpose and helped pay for that purpose to live. And I know it's not a card that was written for me, but doesn't it tell you about those homes we make for us and for all the parts we used to hide? Somewhere along that canal, near that card, a letter to a sleeping wife answers back about a little flat in the city's West End, about the places and the people that become embedded within us. Doesn't that love from and those ands sound like all the someones you're linked to as well? It's not my receipt, they're not my fragrance strips. The love yous and you got this aren't for me. They laugh with the chicken scroll messages my best friend writes to me just because. They tell me about that feeling of finding someone like you in places filled with more people who aren't, of finding parts of yourself smiling back at you in a face that's not your own. They ask me how many people house pieces of me, how many prop these pieces up on the days they can't manage alone. The love yous and you got this seem to reverberate through that corner of the warehouse, in favours asked and gifted thank yous, and faces that sneak their way into every story formed in words and pictures. The gratitude of being able to lean on people who can hold the entire weight of you quietly rumbles from the very foundations of the room.
That was so lovely. Thank you so much, Elouise, for that reading. And
Thank you.
yeah, it just speaks volumes to everything you talked about, that connection you feel to the archive, and it really comes through in the writing. So thank you so much. We've got about time left, and I just wonder if there's any questions in the room from our eager listeners, or if any of you have questions to each other, Holly, Bek, Elouise, Sorcha. You can also use the chat, folks that are listening in, if you're feeling a bit shy about coming on.
Can I make a comment, not a question?
Can you be that academic, Bek?
I just wanted to say, after hearing you read there, Eloise, that I'm not someone who's very good with words. I've never been good at like reading and writing, and I love when I hear something or read a piece of writing where I'm like, I've managed to just put my finger on a feeling that I have been feeling that I've not been able to articulate. And I think it's really, yeah, it's really beautiful that you've managed to capture or articulate what community feels like, and how, yeah, it's something that's so, for me personally, because I'm not the best with words, it's something so difficult to actually explain to people. So yeah, it's just, that's my comment. It's just really nice to hear something like that and feel like I relate a lot to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think that is difficult to articulate what community is beyond connection, right? Which is only one part of what community actually is. It's because you can be connected with someone and not do all those lovely other things like support and look out for and take care of and pull up, and raise up in those moments and hold space for and all that stuff you can do with that is important for a community and feeling that. And I think going back to what I said about being doubly precarious, we're also sometimes doubly unsafe in spaces that we exist in as working class queer people and or queer working class people, whatever way you want to present your identity first, whichever way you're feeling that day, more. So, yeah, I think it's just lovely to hear and see and the reflections and how I think the writing and the visual aspects of the exhibition really sit nice together. So thank you both so much for that. I'm just going to do one last call for questions, and if not, I'm going to do a little bit of a wrap up. No.
Hey,
Oh, Domenico, hi.
sorry, I've not got my camera on. I think there's gonna be a question in there somewhere. But first of all, I wanted to say amazing work from everyone, Holly, contributors, and Elouise. I really liked your piece as well. From the pictures that I saw, I was really intrigued by the fact that well, first of all, recognize that kind of image of Glasgow very well because I've seen you in there, Holly, a couple of times, but it speaks to me as well so much, even though I am also from very, far away. And I feel like I've been growing my own roots for the past 8 years, especially in the last few ones. I can feel that picture of Glasgow really resonates quite a lot. And another aspect that I really like is that often with queer archives, we're kind of used to having to work with a lot of ephemeral sources. And what I like about yours is that you focus a lot on tangible items, and I really like the materiality of it and how the city really comes out through that. I think it's a nice change for me personally because I've been working a lot with sources that might not be there, and they require us to create certain narratives around them, but it's nice to have those tangible concrete items that really um just reverberate the essence of a queer city or a city through a queer lens, which I think Elouise has been able to really capture as well. So I guess the question in that is how have you managed to work with that concrete, tangible item as opposed to something that you need to invent almost, or you need to assume or confabulate around. I don't know.
Thank you for all the nice things you said and for outing me for clubbing. I think because like I worked so closely with each person on their object, it was that like I wasn't curating these objects, I wasn't picking them and like making up a story. It was that we worked together to find an object that did hold a story. Um, and like the fact that I've put receipts that say I love you that I usually keep in my purse on into a frame on a wall, it like solidifies this like thing that I forgot I had in my purse, but I kept it with me for a reason. And like being able to put those things on display that have stories that mean so much to us, I think that sort of like solidifies their story. And that's how you're being able to see that solid story in the item.
I was just going to come in on that too, just because obviously, Domenico, you're talking about, I know you've obviously got extensive experience of handling archives, and there's something in that, isn't there, in terms of um, what is kept and why it's kept and who it's for, and also the way in which those materials are catalogued and stored is very much around preservation of the material object, not about the subjective, expansive multi-layered ways in which that object can speak to the owner, but to others as part of that. And I just wondered, because that's obviously something that we're trying to do a wee bit more at the archive, to archive the material, to capture that information, but to have this sort of subjective opinion and add that kind of subjectivity, I guess, within it too. So as much as we can from people who are donating stuff in, we can hear from them and capture their thoughts and connections about that object or that relationship to Alasdair or others as a part of that. But I just wondered, because, you know, of your experience in handling archives, what you've picked up on in terms of Holly's project, what are the other ways in which that could maybe be considered in other archives to make sure it isn't always academic and it isn't always around it's not about the preservation of connection, right, and of stories and of liminal experiences, which is, this is very much celebrating. That's what I was really wanting to kind of ask you about, but open up a little bit more to others.
I think that's where the sort of working class aspect really comes into place. And I think I can't remember who it was before, but someone mentioned the fact that it is working class individuals who sort of hold on to anything. And maybe that aspect um kind of imbues the tangible item with that essence of being queer or being working class in itself. And it's the wish to consolidate your experience into mundane objects that are part of an archive, which is not necessarily what we consider to be an authoritative or a big kind of idea of what an archive is, but is nonetheless as important as those other ones. And again, it's also proof, living proof that there are tangible ways to describe queerness or working class life, especially for future generations, which would make it easier again to understand how simple day-to-day life experiences are so much important rather than just the big histories, which is something that we've also mentioned before. I don't know if there's a response in that, but
yeah, but I mean, I guess that's the difficulty. You sort of mentioned that initially in your introduction around archive. I mean, to have an archive to start with has been a privileged position that that hierarchy needs to be kind of pulled down, right, and reasserted. But also in terms of the current scene in Scotland, archives aren't fundable things either. That's why they're institutionalized, because they've got the capacity to be able to do that. So it becomes more and more precarious if it's then dependent on individuals, particularly if you're mapping histories that don't have that investment to begin with. So it's something to consider, isn't it, and to talk about in terms of our the current state, but how we fix and prioritize some of this kind of going forward.
I think there's also a question of how you organize an archive can affect how you interact with it, right? So there's there are practicalities to boxing things because they have to be protected from certain light, certain conditions. All of that is part of conservation and preservation of certain types of objects, particularly, aged papers or those kind of things, right? So there's a kind of actual practicality to how things have to be archived. But I think there's a really great book on the German Dada artist Hannah Höch, who some of you might know, and she collected, hundreds of items of Dada artists, and she stored them to the war and kind of hid them in her attic. But she had this really complex system of how she organized it. And when she died, the Berlinische Galerie in Berlin took over this stuff. But before they did that, they sent a photographer in to catalog how it looked. So there's these photographs of how the archive looked because they knew that they couldn't take in all of it. So it was split. So the visual stuff went to one place and the letters and the papers went to another place. And now that had to be sort of accessioned into a way that was readable, I guess, to someone who wasn't privy to her system. But if you look at her system and how she used it, it was actually spatialized rather than sort of put into that system of I nearly used the German word there. Sorry, ordering system that we're used to with sort of like accession numbers or archive numbers or whatever. And that spatiality of it changes the interactivity and what you understand is important, because what was important to her in that moment of when she collected it actually is what you see, and you see the layers of how that changes through the different circumstances that she found herself in. So, you know, when she was asked to write to someone about a particular artist, that stuff was what was on top, because that's what she was thinking about at that time. That's what she was engaging with. But if you went in at a different time, it was something else that was in the pile. And I think that's reflected also in how you've kind of been working with the archive, Sorcha. And I mean, I'm very biased as sitting on the board, but because I obviously do believe in what the Grey Archive's trying to do, which is to open up these systems and make them less rigid, less hierarchical, less cut off from communities, cut off from people to have access to, because I think that's how you find that boundary, or how you break that boundary down of saying, well, you know, these are things that have to be preserved, and they're really important to preserve them in this way, but we don't have to do it in this rigid, academic, sterile way that we've seen before. And we can also, whilst doing that, still preserve and conserve these works in a way that is true to standard. So I think that's the balance to be found, and I think actually if you look at what Alasdair collected over his life, a lot of it is actually ephemerate. It's a bit like those receipts, those stubs, those things that are kind of throwaway almost, but have a personal connection and personal stories behind them. And I mean, who doesn't love a hoarder? Let's be honest.
Yeah, I wondered if that, in terms of like Holly, Bek and Elouise, like from being involved in this, what that has made you maybe think about in terms of, I mean, Elouise, you've openly admitted that you're a hoarder, right? So it's like, has this being involved in this made you think about objects that you've got and how you would almost archive or keep or make those edits and selections about what's important? I mean, it's maybe too early in terms of you've just been involved in it to kind of actually reflect and implement that. But, you know, I guess what we're talking about is often the incidental. It's not the kind of monumental or valuable thing in terms of kind of a monetary value. It can be a receipt in your wallet, like you said, Holly, or whatever it is. So has it made you rethink some of these objects from your collective past and think about what would be the things that you might put in a box and keep a wee bit safer based on that?
I did an archive project for my final project, my master's, where I did just go through had like my childhood diaries as part of it's like a digital archive that I made, but most of it was like archiving me and my friends in a way and like trying to show like connection through that. So it's something I'd already started thinking about, but I think some of the stuff that I was like, I just didn't put in that archive because I was like, that's actually a load of tat. And then I would see those objects in like Holly stuff. I was like, actually, no, it's not. Like little receipts and like things like that. They have meaning because it's like relation to me and then how it connects me to like the wider space. I think some things I definitely still need to bin. I'm not very good at figuring out what those things are. I don't think I need like my moldy Jacqueline Wilson books collected on a bookshelf, but I don't think I'll ever throw them out. So I think it's made me reconsider like referring to my stuff as tat or as rubbish, because I think so much of like working class history, the way that it's archived and like the objects that you use to archive it, it's like designated as rubbish because of like the materials or like what it is, just based on like the culture that it's come from. It's like found objects, it's hand-me-down clothes, it's not these like really elegant, expensive pieces. It's not like, it's probably secondhand books as well, and it's like diaries and stuff like that. But I think it's like understanding it from where it's come from. It's made me kind of reconsider like myself within that. Like, yeah, okay, it's like a moldy Jacqueline Wilson book, but I read it at least 100 times, and like it had so much history before that. It's got like writing in the margins and that. So I think it just made me describe it differently when I talk to people.
Yeah, that's already an impact, isn't it? In terms of, there you go. Yeah. What about you, Bex or Holly? You got any reflections on that?
Yeah, I actually, when I moved flats, I had a massive clear out, and actually, the SingStar was one of the things I just couldn't get rid of. Yeah, and it's not that I use it all the time; it's just collecting dust in a cupboard. But it's something that I've just never been able to actually get rid of. In terms of like archiving things in my life. I do have a drawer where I keep things in, which are personal letters that people have written to me or postcards and things like that. But it definitely has made me think a bit more differently about things that maybe I would consider as things that I would just chuck out. Which, yeah, it's interesting. It's also just interesting because I didn't actually realize why I was holding on to the SingStar until Holly asked me to take part in the exhibition. So
yeah, but you articulated it really well why it was important. But almost it's only with a bit of time and distance and perspective that you could look back on that and see what that was such a sort of central moment for you. But it's only with time and space that you can kind of do that. So I think these are things that we're always editing and making decisions on, and we can't in that moment almost know what might be the thing that will resonate and be kind of singled out from that. But it's kind of important to keep enough of it to be able to make those choices going forward. I feel that's the thing that we maybe didn't, Holly, maybe we need to do for like the final day, right? Is get the SingStar mic'd up and used again for like a final event. I can't believe that wasn't considered. Bring it back for one last round.
a SingStar battle.
Yeah. Wow.
Very important. Very important. Okay. So we're almost to time, so I think it's probably wise that we round up and let people go off and get dinner if they haven't had it yet. So thank you so much to all of our speakers. Thank you to Holly for organising this wonderful exhibition. Thank you to Sorcha and Holly for the invitation for me to chair. I'm really grateful for the experience. I'm really grateful to hear all your reflections. Thank you to our 3 listeners. It was great to have you in the room. Thank you for the lovely questions and comments. And yeah, I wish you all a very good evening. Take care. Thanks so much. Bye, folks.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks, everyone.